What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, we have a great episode coming your way today. UFC 330 is over. Islam Makhachev has successfully defended the 170 belt, now having defended the 155 belt and the 170 belt, and he shattered Anderson Silva's record of 16 wins in a row in the process. We're going to break that fight down from a technical perspective, talk about what we saw out of Islam, what we saw out of Ian, and then get into what might be next for both gentlemen. You know, they both said some stuff in the press after the fight was over. Dana White had some things to say, not so happy with the way Ian Garry behaved in the cage. We'll react to that. Everything will be below in the timestamps if there's a particular part of the conversation that you're most interested in. And before we get started, guys, we had over 33,000 people tune in for our live stream yesterday when we gave commentary on the fight. I just want to say thank you all so much for those of you that were there. We sincerely appreciate it. Now let's get into the episode. Nick, Islam Makhachev, 17 wins in a row. Yep. Now, you know, Champ has kind of become, I don't want to say stale, right? But there's been a lot of people that have done it since Conor McGregor did it. And by a lot, it's more than 10 now. Yeah. And, you know, but the one thing that everybody kind of wanted to see was somebody get a second belt, stay in the weight class a little while, and do some title defenses. And Islam seems to be on his way to do that. And I was actually quite happy in the post-fight presser that he said, I'm going to be around for a few more years. I'm not young. I'm 34, almost 35 years old. And because he was asked by one of the reporters, do you want to fight immediately after Ramadan, which is coming up in February of 2027, so that that'll line you up for 2 fights in 27. And he said, brother, I want to fight before Ramadan and again after. I need to get the show on the road.
I love that.
I think he wants to get to 20 wins in a row, which would mean 3 more title defenses from here. The 3 names that he sort of mentioned repeatedly in the press conference were Prates, Morales, and Shavkat.
Yeah.
So it kind of seems like those are the 3 in his mind that he thinks, okay, I need to beat these 3 guys to really cement myself. And he didn't want to talk too much about GOAT status. He said, when my career is over, we'll go back and talk about it. I love that out of Islam. I heard a lot of things out of him at the post-fight presser that I liked. But before we get into that, because I know you're ready to dive into this technically, and Islam showed us a lot of good things from a technical perspective. What did you see out of him against a very tall, very game, and very difficult to take and hold down opponent in Ian Garry last night?
Yeah, so this fight was not at all what I expected, right? So I'll say that in part it was not what I expected. Islam Makhachev came across the cage and stood his ground. But oddly enough, Ian Garry did the exact same thing, and that's why they both were basically stationary in there and sort of just waiting to see which one was going to go first, like a game of chicken. And it was very interesting to see because Islam's not really going to, you know, compromise his safety, and he's not going to, you know, lose any of his defensive soundness just to get in there and make it entertaining. He was kind of waiting for Ian to do that, and Ian really didn't use any footwork whatsoever last night. It was so weird to see because he's such a good mover. Usually he likes to use every square inch of the cage, and he wasn't doing that. It was sort of just a weird, slow, open stance fight that you don't typically see, especially at a championship level. But I think the fact that both guys were so calculated and measured was sort of the reason that Islam was able to find the takedown so early. And, you know, he got 7 total takedowns in the fight. I know that Ian outstruck him a little bit, but I would say Islam got the better of the striking as a whole, as far as the fight's concerned.
Yeah, a lot of those were ground strikes. You know, Islam was holding position and Ian was kind of, you know, hitting the body, hitting the side of the face. So the stats got kind of padded, but definitely the biggest shot of the night was that kick by Islam.
Beautiful head kick. And Islam's kick to Ian Garry's face, which dropped him, reminded me of Khabib's overhand that he landed on Conor McGregor. There are actually a lot of similarities between Dagestan versus Ireland Part 1 and Dagestan versus Ireland Part 2. You know, some of the grappling exchanges, the way Ian Garry would crawl himself over to the cage once he got taken down in the open. But speaking about getting taken down in the open, it's the single leg. And Islam Makhachev is one of the very few people on the UFC roster that can successfully hit a single leg, and it's not a head in single leg, it's a head out single leg, but he sets himself up with such a great entry that there's no chance that you can actually grab a guillotine. And I know that it would be dumb for Ian Garry to have tried to grab a guillotine, but he didn't even have the opportunity to look for it. And naturally, that's just where your hand tends to fall when somebody shoots an outside head single. And Ian was really not biting on any of the feints from Islam, and I believe that's what gave Islam the confidence to go in there at about a minute and a half into the first round and get that first takedown. Ian was not taking any steps back, and I commend him for that, but it was kind of dumb. When Islam starts showing you level change feints and you're not moving backwards, one of those feints is going to be a live shot, and that's exactly what it was. He grabbed that leg. Now, again, go back to the similarities. Ian Garry's defense looked very similar to Conor's defense against Khabib. And, I won't say that he was doing anything wrong, but what he was doing requires momentum. And Islam is the one initiating the takedown. So, of course, he's the one bringing the momentum. And I think that Ian, in a perfect scenario, would have been able to get to that over the back grip and then try to roll with Islam and get him off of the top of him. But Islam kills all the momentum once he gets in and gets a hold of your leg. I thought it was really technical the way Islam controlled, and even though Ian was doing the right thing by getting to the cage, which betters your chance at building a base and getting back up to your feet, Islam was still there for the isometric holds on the body lock for the entire 3.5 minutes left in the fight, or in the round, I'm sorry. And it just speaks to his ability to come out and control somebody. Now, I know it wasn't the most exciting first round. Some people are angry at the fight as a whole. They say the whole 25 minutes was a bit of a dud. But I think when you're dealing with a guy like Islam Makhachev, who has gone up, and while 170 might be the greatest move for him to have made after his run at 155, I think after last night, he is slightly undersized for 170.
Yeah.
Ian's a full-framed 170 guy, and Islam had his success, but it's a little bit harder to take those guys down. It's a little bit harder to control them, and Islam is not the kind of guy that's going to make mistakes or, force errors out of his opponent just so he can bring the fight. What he's going to do is take you where he thinks he has the best chance of winning. Yes, he'll hunt submissions. Yes, he'll look for ground and pound, but if that stuff's not available because your defense is on point, then he's just going to, do what he can, whether it's knees to the leg, just so he can maybe slow your wheels down a little bit, or a couple little shots, pop shots to the head while you're trying to build your base. Nothing really out of the ordinary, just high-level fundamentals as far as the ground and pound and the cage work is concerned. I thought Islam looked really good, but I understand why some people are saying maybe he didn't blow our hair back in this title defense.
Yeah, well, the Islam being undersized thing is a valid concern, and when you look at him in there, the optics kind of tell you that, yeah, Ian, even though there was a lot made, and even we talked about this leading up to it when they faced off on the stairs there in Philadelphia, It didn't seem like there was a 5-inch height differential, and it didn't in the cage last night either when they were both barefoot.
Yeah, I'd give it maybe 4 inches.
I wouldn't even say that. I'd say probably 2.5 to 3, but still Ian Garry's bigger. But, okay, so Islam Makhachev, a little bit undersized. Is that the reason that he had trouble keeping Ian Garry down last night?
And the reason that he's had trouble finishing people since he's got to 170.
Well, I will just say to you, I don't believe that anybody would make the argument that Shavkat Rakhmonov is small for the weight class. He's a full-framed 170. And I will remind you that at one point in that fight, Ian Garry had Shavkat's back with a rear naked choke in, and it was very difficult for Shavkat to even get Ian down, let alone hold him down. And I want to bring that up because I think that we need to give Makhachev credit for what he was able to do last night. No, he was not able to finish Ian Garry. Yes, Ian Garry was difficult to take down, but guess what? Ian Garry's pretty damn good with his takedown defense.
Very good.
That's what the story is here, is Islam Makhachev had to figure out how to defeat a guy who's extremely difficult to take down, even more difficult to hold down, and has some pretty dang good grappling of his own. And he did that beautifully. He had the control time in at least 3. I gave him 4 rounds. I think one judge had it 3 rounds to 2. But to win a decisive victory over Ian Garry, there's a lot of good things that you can say about Islam's performance. And oh, by the way, he also had the most significant strikes of the fight. He landed the bigger punches, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He landed the big head kick. I know his nose was busted up, but he said that came from a headbutt. Ian landed some good jabs, but if anybody was very close to ending the fight, it was Islam. Ian Garry, nowhere in that 25-minute period of time, was anywhere near the door of finishing Islam Makhachev.
Right.
And so, when you look at Islam's performance as a whole, a lot of Islam detractors and the people that don't really like his fighting style will point to the fact that he's not finishing people at 170.
Right.
And I guess that may be a fair criticism, but at the same time, Ian Garry was the only guy that was not finished by Shavkat Rakhmonov.
Right.
And in fact, may have had the situation in that fight was the closest to finishing the fight was his rear naked choke attempt on Shavkat. And so I think we have to take the criticism of Islam with the counterbalance of, you know what, like him or hate him, Ian Garry is a really damn good fighter. Now, I want to get into Ian a little bit because we can say a lot of good things about Makhachev, and I can find ways to give praise to Ian Machado Garry, which I think he deserves for sticking in there. But
surviving against the pound-for-pound #1 fighter for a full 25 minutes, yes, sure, that can be impressive. It's a feather in your cap, if you will. But he didn't go out there to just survive. I think he really did want to win this fight, and I think he limited himself tremendously with the tools that he was using. We saw almost no straight twos, and in the open stance, the straight two is one of the best things. It's actually more effective than your jab in most fights because the jab runs into their jab hand. So what you have to do is sort of create angles, move off to their weak side, which forces them to circle in. That makes your opponent a little bit more square, and then you can start to throw that back hand a little bit, maybe even throw some push kicks. And I know we were talking about Ian making the adjustment to not kick so much because Islam's so good at catching kicks and you can't afford to get taken down because, as we saw last night, once Islam gets on top, it's almost impossible to get out from under there. But Ian limited himself far too much. It wasn't until the 5th round where he started showing the back shoulder coming forward a little bit and kind of showing you like weight transfer to the lead leg, right? So I just don't know what was going on in Ian's mind from the fact that he stripped away all of his footwork and he stripped away all the power side attacks that he has, which again, in open stance are the most important things that you can throw. Double up the power side, throw the two, and then send the head kick. He was just throwing naked head kicks, and it's evident that Islam getting in that mix and getting a clean break and then finding that kick was the more successful head kicks thrown between either man. I know Ian had one that was close to hitting the mark. Islam even said his fingers went into my eye, which I think he meant his toes. I don't think there was an eye poke, but it was Khabib was talking about how he pays for English translation and they don't seem to take the lessons very seriously. So toes, fingers, tomato,
I think Islam's English is great. I mean, he's come along quite a bit, and Islam kind of gave him back a little bit. He's like, yeah, you criticize my English, but you were the guy asking for the Philly cheesecake.
California cheesecake.
The California cheesecake. We're not even in the right side of the country. But, okay, so Ian Garry, what is the problem with his performance last night in my eyes? Very simple. He lacks killer instinct.
Sure.
He's a massive decision merchant when you get to the highest level in the UFC. He really only has knockout victories over 2 gentlemen that are no longer in the UFC.
And that pissed Dana off, by the way.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of, and I want to get into Dana's comments at the press conference because I think that's important too. But for me, with Ian Garry, I want more killer instinct out of him. I don't like all the hugging and kissing in between rounds and all that. One thing that you can say about the Dagestanis, whether you hate them or whether you love them, is that they show respect to their opponents. They always, in the build-up, they're complimentary of their opponents. They don't talk a lot of smack. Khabib and Conor may have been the one-off where things got a little bit nasty, but most of the time when a Dagestani fights, it's respect. And Islam even said in the post-fight presser last night, I feel like Ian Garry overdoes it with the respect. And to be honest, Nick, I agree with him 100%. I'm looking over there. I think it was the 2nd round where Islam had him against the cage and he was kind of knee on the ground. And he's looking over at presumably Layla, his wife, and his son and blowing kisses to him and everything. And it's like man, you showed up here for a title. You're on the main event of a title fight against the guy who a lot of people think is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. You're hugging him and slapping him in between every round when a round ends, when a round starts.
Rubbing his head.
Yeah, you're and in the 5th round, you're just giving him all this respect when the fight ends. You're raising his hand before the judges even say anything. We knew which the decision was going to be, but still.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at your family and you're blowing them kisses. Listen, I'm a family guy. I understand having love for your wife and children. There's nothing wrong with that, but guess what? Daddy's at work right now.
Right.
We're on the clock. We're trying to win a title fight against a guy that hasn't lost in 16 fights.
Right.
And I just didn't like that he was seemingly in there having a good time. It's like, we're not in here to have a good time. And Islam said that as well. We're in here to hurt each other. We're in here to punch each other, break each other's noses and all that sort of stuff. And that's where I want to get to Dana White. Dana White said, look, Ian Garry came out there in the 5th round, and I was thinking he was going to come out and, he knew he was behind on the scorecards.
Masvidal-style flying knee.
Exactly. This is his last chance. Go out there and lay your ass on the line and see what happens. And instead he comes out and he hugs Islam, he rubs his head, and then he just goes right back to the same single shots. I think Ian Garry's going to have a real problem becoming a UFC champion if he doesn't get some semblance of killer instinct. Because guess what? Carlos Prates ain't going in there to hug and kiss anybody.
Yeah.
And he ain't blowing kisses to anybody in the crowd when he's fighting either.
No. There could be a big, ultra-sized pack of cigarettes in the front row, and he's not going to blow that a kiss.
He'll get to those after the fight's over with. Michael Morales, same thing. Like, these guys have real killer instinct.
Yeah.
And Ian Garry, in a lot of ways, you could say he's a better, more technical fighter than Prates and Morales. I think you wouldn't be crazy to make that statement. Now, has Prates gotten better since he lost to Ian? I think he probably has.
Yes.
So maybe Prates could beat him now. But when you think about threats to Makhachev for dethroning him, it's not going to be the friendly guy that doesn't knock anybody out, that's seemingly off his game plan and not even using the movement that makes him a great fighter. He's just happy to be there. He was happy to be chosen for the opportunity, and he's just having a great time in there with the world champion. No, Prates is coming in there to separate your head from your shoulders.
Right.
Same thing with Morales, and these guys are coming in. So even if they're not as skilled as Ian, they do pose a more serious threat to Makhachev, in my opinion. And before we get into what's next for Makhachev, am I off on my read that Ian is just too friendly? He's too, checked out. And even one more thing before I hand it back to you. He was in the locker room. You see, even Layla and his son doesn't really know as much what's going on. And the coaches, they're all kind of just sitting there, heads down, like feeling sad. And Ian's like, man, we made it to the top of the mountain. We just fell a little bit short. It's okay. Like,
you made it to the top of the mountain, then got thrown off by the pound for pound best fighter in the world.
I would have liked to see you a little bit more upset after the fight. I would have liked to see you lay it on the line a little bit more in the cage, especially in that 5th round. But you came out, and you're the one that it should matter the most for. You're the one that actually had to fight the guy. You're the one that's going to be the champion. You're the one whose name is going to be in record books forever if you get the win. Not your coaches. Yeah, your coaches play supporting roles. Your wife plays a supporting role. But at the end of the day, it's you, man. It's a solo sport. It's a lonely sport. And you're seemingly the most elated of anybody in your locker room. I didn't like it. I like Ian. I think Ian's a nice person, and Dana used the word classy, and I think that's a good word to use for Ian, but he lacks killer instinct, and he's going to always have problems, especially in a stacked 170, lacking killer instinct.
Yeah, he's too classy, and people are kind of over this respect era, myself included. I am all for a healthy dose of respect, and the Dagestani fighters have given that to their opponents since they started their careers back when Khabib was really the first guy from there to represent Dagestan. But there's a limit, right? And Ian Garry saw the line and went way beyond it. He's far too respectful. This is a cage fight at the end of the day. Think about Tommy McMillan. He's coming out there throwing the bird to the eye.
Bird to the eyes,
bird
as Tim
to the
Welch
eye.
says.
Yeah, a beautiful saying, and a great technique, by the way. Bird to the eye, throw the overhand. But that is what cage fighting is. Of course, we have the martial artists and the people that are, living in a dojo or in any sort of place that has mats where you spend your life training. They teach you how to be respectful and have good discipline and be dedicated to a craft. But remember, fighting is a sport and sports are entertainment. And the biggest difference between combat sports and every other sport that has a ball in it or any sort of other game is you can actually have animosity and conflict, and then you can resolve that by fighting each other. That's the best way two men can get things out of their system, right? You guys have a beef, Go fight about it and then shake hands afterwards. And that is fine with the Dagestanis. They're okay with that. They don't want you smacking them on the ass and rubbing their head and blowing kisses in the cage while you're in the middle of a fight. Remember, these people paid their hard-earned money to see a fist fight.
And it ain't cheap to go to a UFC event
Not
anymore.
at all. They broke the record, too, for the Philadelphia arena, which they always do. But, this is a fight at the end of the day. And look, maybe we've come a long way from the guys that look like Cody Garbrandt, covered in tattoos, and, that's the stereotypical cage fighter look. And maybe it's a little bit more of a respectful game. But I think we need those guys who are willing to press buttons and evoke emotions and piss the crowd off, piss their opponent off. I have to remind you that Ireland versus Dagestan Part 1 in Conor versus Khabib is the biggest fight of all time. And while Khabib didn't want to be a part of that disrespect, he certainly wasn't going to let Conor, walk all over him. And Conor, being the showman that he is, was like, I'm not going to, come out there and be overly respectful for these guys. I'm going to find dirt on them. I'm going to find dirt on their manager. I'm going to get nasty with this and hopefully take them out of the game mentally. We saw it with Jose Aldo, right? He was able to, basically the term mental warfare in MMA was coined because of what Conor McGregor was able to do and get his opponents all out of sorts prior to the fight, and then during the fight, he'll even talk a little smack to him just to make it even, push the point home even more. I don't see that out of Ian Garry. It probably, for Islam Makhachev, is weird to face a guy who almost feels like maybe he's pulling punches. It almost feels like he's conceding rounds and just happy to be there, like you said, rather than going out there to dethrone the champion. At the end of the day, Islam has what every 170 fighter in the world wants, which is that belt. And if you're not going to go out there and give it your 100% best, whether you got to be nice, mean, respectful, disrespectful, whatever it is, if you're not going out there and actually showing us that you are trying to take that belt from the champion, then you don't belong in a title fight. I think Carlos Prates, I think Michael Morales, I think these type of guys would actually go out there and put the screws to Islam. They might not win, but they're going to fight like hell to try to get that belt. And I feel like Ian Garry's performance really slowed his momentum down, because I get he lost to the pound for pound #1 guy in the world. And there's, you can't really be too upset at a guy for losing to the best fighter on the planet, but you didn't even give yourself a chance. You limited yourself technically as far as what weapons you were throwing. You limited yourself with your footwork. You basically showed him way too much respect, and you almost looked distracted while you were in there. And a lot of people are also saying that Islam versus Ian was a competitive fight. I didn't see it that way.
No.
I think that Ian Garry won one round, and the round he won was a very close round. Islam, clear as day, won 4 rounds, in my opinion. And I don't see how you don't have a massive sense of urgency to go take the champion's head off when you're down, in my opinion, 3 rounds to 1 going into the final round. And Ian didn't really see that. It looks like he's just making sure his kids are okay, which, again, if you're a good dad, if you're an active father, all the power to you. But this is fighting. This is your job. This is your livelihood. This is the dream that you've had since you were a little kid. And now you've just stripped all of that away from yourself. And the game is that for promoters to promote guys that can sell fights. And unfortunately, this overly respectful vibe that Ian Garry's giving us is not what a promoter wants when they're promoting a cage fight, when they're promoting the fisticuffs. They want a Carlos Prates who's like, yeah, I might lose, I might get taken down, but that man's going to be bleeding by the time this cage door opens back up and they read the name of who won the fight.
So question for you. Ian Garry, let's assume, I think we both established that Ian Garry does not have killer instincts.
Yeah, not at all.
Let's say Islam Makhachev wins 3 more fights and retires. Ian Garry's a very young man, 28 years old, already fighting for a title.
And he even referenced Volkanovski at 38 and Justin Gaethje at 36. So he's got 10 years to be their age and could potentially still have a great career.
Exactly. So can Ian Garry, without kind of turning in and embracing his killer instincts and his tenacity and grit, just off the skills alone, become a champion in the post-Islam Makhachev era?
No, I don't think so, because again, remember, the UFC looks at this as a business. They are a business, and they're a profitable one. They do very well, but they have to make fights that people are interested in seeing. And I just don't think that Ian Garry was able to, yes, he went viral, but for all the wrong reasons leading up to this fight. He's not really giving us those moments that make us, get that big fight feel and get on the edge of our seats and be like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Obviously, Islam's the favorite, but this guy's talking like he he knows something we don't know. You know, everything that came out of Ian's mouth about Islam was, this is the greatest fighter in the world. I'm so proud to be here. I'm so glad I get to share the octagon with this guy. It's incredible. You know, my journey's, you know, only just beginning, and I can't wait to see what I can do as the champion. But it didn't feel like he was actually believing in himself enough to go beat a pound for pound #1 fighter in the world. And Islam's almost like thrown off. He's like, why are you being so respectful? I get it. I'm respectful to you too. I'm not going to come out and say anything bad about your family. I'm not going to get online and chirp like the other people are, you know, the people that watch the fights. But I need you to at least, you know, push back a little bit on me rather than just kind of glaze me over and over every time you get a microphone opportunity.
Yeah, that was the problem that I had with it. And like I said, I'm all for, I was even happy to see the Khamzat Sean Strickland like handshake at the end. Like we're good.
That is a picture perfect version of what the UFC likes to promote. Get it going wild, where it's almost to the point of a fist fight at a press conference. And then by the end, we've got Khamzat wrapping the belt around Sean Strickland. We didn't expect that, right? We didn't expect a kiss on the top of Sean Strickland's head from Khamzat Chimaev after the buildup of that fight. But that's exactly what we got. And it's because we had the conflict and then we resolved it with a 25-minute fight. However it goes, both men are grown and mature enough to shake hands and either admit defeat or accept victory. And I just feel like Ian Garry missed the mark on that totally. The fact that he is not promoting fights the way a cage fighting promoter would want a fight to be promoted, and the fact that he's just like overly respectful, plus he's a decision merchant. I don't think that there's really much need for him to be a world title holder. I don't see why they would try to, you know, launch him right back into another title fight, or, you know, maybe he wins 2 or 3 more and becomes undeniable once again. But 170, as we all know, is the most stacked division that the UFC's maybe ever seen. It legitimately, 155 back when the Conor and Khabib days were there, it was murderer's row. But 170 right now, 1 through 10 is an absolute freak show of just the most talented guys, and most of them have never touched the UFC gold, and the ones that have are having to face these guys, and they're all getting knocked out one after the next. So I think that the UFC at welterweight has too many great characters, too many guys who are willing to go out there and actually bring a fight, both physically and mentally, to the champion, that they don't need to worry about Ian Garry and him being overly respectful anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have, so Prates, I think, has a better resume than Michael Morales. He could very feasibly be next. Michael Morales is right there.
Beautiful record, too.
You have Shavkat, who's got a fantastic record, just needing to get himself healthy again. You have Yaroslav Amosov coming up. You have Uros Medic on his way up. I mean, those two guys, the latter two, they still have a couple fights to win, but there's a lot of really good talent that's either there already or making their way down, that they don't realistically need to put Ian Garry in another title fight anytime soon.
Right.
So what I think they should do, and what we talked about in those that were on the poll last night, it seems like Shavkat versus Ian 2 might be the move, because Ian is going to not fall that far back in the rankings. Shavkat needs a win to get back in action, and a win over the guy that just went all 5 rounds with the champ kind of puts him in that #1 contenders talk as well. And so maybe you go Prates and then Morales and then Shavkat.
And speaking of being respectful, Islam was the right amount of respectful to Shavkat Rakhmonov, because we all know that Shavkat was on this run to become a world champion. And of course, things happened. He had the knee injury. I think it followed by another knee injury, and then a couple issues with his family and some car wrecks and horrible stuff that happened that took him out of competition. But nobody forgot how good Shavkat actually is, especially not the champion and pound for pound #1 fighter in the world in Islam Makhachev. So I love that he didn't just breeze over Shavkat or act like he forgot about him, because he certainly did not. And I believe that Prates is the #1 contender that deserves the next title shot. He had the shirt on that said, "I'm next." Michael Morales is the next guy, but he hasn't fought since November of last year. So if
he needs to fight again.
If Islam's not going to fight until 2027, we can't wait over a year to see Michael Morales, especially after what Carlos Prates did to the former champion Jack Della Maddalena. You got to give a guy like Prates, with as hot as he is, as big of a star as he is, you know, the unique stylistic matchup between the striker in Carlos Prates and the grappler in Islam is so intriguing that I don't see really any case scenario where Michael Morales deserves to jump him. Now, on paper, is Michael Morales a tougher fight for Islam Makhachev? Yes, but Carlos Prates did everything he needed to do and then some. And I just feel like because he fought more recently, him and Islam are more similar on a schedule than Morales is. It just makes more sense. I don't think a guy who's never been a UFC champion can rest on a 1.5-year layoff and still get a title shot over a hot rising prospect and maybe one of the biggest stars in the sport in Carlos Prates.
Yeah, I agree. Prates should be next. We put a poll in the live chat when we were doing a reaction last night.
Yeah.
Who is the tougher test for Islam? Is it Prates or is it Morales? Now, surprisingly, a little bit, it was 75-25 for Morales. So most people think that Morales. I figured it would be Michael because he's got good judo and because he's big, and we did see Prates taken down by JDM. But I wasn't expecting it to be that drastic. And so then I said, okay, let's end that poll and do another poll. Let's assume it's Morales because you guys think that Morales is the tougher test.
Okay.
Who wins, Islam or Michael Morales? And it was overwhelmingly 85% to 15% said that Islam Makhachev would defeat Michael Morales. So that tells me that most people think that he can win not only his next fight, but his next 2 fights. Now, what we didn't ask was who wins, Islam or Shavkat? And we could do a little MMA math if you want to, Ian Garry being the common opponent. I don't think that's necessarily accurate, but Shavkat's getting not old, but older and a lot of injuries and coming back off of serious knee stuff. So my question to you is, Islam seems to want to go on a 20-fight win streak in the UFC.
Yeah, last night made it 17, so.
Over or under 50% chance that Islam can actually win his next 3 fights and retire? Let's say make it a clean 20 wins in a row in the UFC, beat Prates, beat Morales, beat Shavkat.
Yeah, I think he can actually win all those fights, and I honestly think Shavkat is the most difficult challenge for all of them. But Islam understands, too, that you have to be, striking while the iron's hot. Carlos Prates has been far more active, right? Shavkat's been out of competition, and I think that Shavkat versus Islam, maybe it's like a crescendo, right? Look, we got the Ian Garry one. That was the lightest. That was like the diet version of a title fight or title defense for Islam. Now we get Carlos Prates, who stylistically may not be as difficult of a fight as Morales, but he deserves the next shot. I think that Islam Makhachev beats Prates, maybe by finish this time, because I just think that on the ground he has way too big of a gap and skill disparity over Prates. Morales is a very interesting one because he has that single shot KO power. He's got the great judo, and he's a unit of a man. Weighs 200-something pounds when he's not cutting weight. And so I think that you were actually building up, if we go Ian, Prates, Morales, and then Shavkat, from easiest to hardest matchup possible. And I think as long as we can get Shavkat in there and get 1 win, then he will get right back into title contention. And he would probably have the graces of the champion in Islam calling for him. Very similar to Movsar versus Volkanovski, which, by the way, got announced last night on for UFC 333. Volkanovski was saying Movsar's the guy. And when the champion says something, the UFC usually likes to take it and they'll run with it. I believe Islam Makhachev will fight Carlos Prates next. He even said it on the commentary desk. He didn't say it in the presser, but he said it on the commentary desk. Prates has done enough work. I think he should be next. I think Morales should come after that.
And he should fight somebody else, he said.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know if there's anybody behind Morales that could beat him. So and there's not many people in front of him, right? It's Ian Garry and it's Prates. So I think that Shavkat Rakhmonov should probably be coming back maybe early 2027, and that's right around when Ian Garry needs to fight again. I say we run that back as a rematch, give it another 5 rounds, see if Shavkat can come back and get right in there with a guy who just fought for a world title. If he can beat Ian Garry, he will have to do no more work. He'll take that beautiful undefeated record right into a world title fight with Islam Makhachev. But in the meantime, I think it's only fair that Carlos Prates gets the next title shot, and I think if Morales wins, then he would follow up and get the second next title shot, and that would kind of segue perfectly into Shavkat getting a title fight either very early 2028 or late 2027. But again, I just don't think that Shavkat needs to be dealt from the bottom of the deck because he's been inactive. Again, it's not by choice. It's because he was injured and then had some issues outside of the cage and outside of training that took him out of activity. But I really do think that Shavkat is 1 win away from getting a title shot, especially if that win is over Ian Garry in a rematch.
Now, Sean Strickland's name came up a lot last night when we were recording, and a lot of people were saying in the chat that actually they think Islam Makhachev should move up to challenge Sean Strickland. Now, I put a poll in the chat again as well. We liked our polls last night, and I said, does Islam actually, after seeing what you saw against Ian Garry, can he beat Sean Strickland? I was expecting it to be more heavily no than yes.
Yeah.
I was off, and maybe we had a subset of really heavy Islam fans in the chat, but they said that, almost overwhelmingly, Islam Makhachev would beat Sean Strickland. So I don't know that I'm in agreement with that right now, because Sean showed us tremendous takedown defense, and he's way more active than Ian Garry was active last night. The volume would be a problem for Islam.
He also brings the mental warfare side. Remember 100%. How him and Khamzat went.
Does Islam move up? And I know it's very dependent on who the champion is. I don't think he's going up to fight Khamzat. I don't think he's going up to fight Imavov. I think that maybe with Sean Strickland, maybe a DDP or somebody like that he would consider.
Yeah.
Do you think, let's assume that Islam's doing 3 more, likelihood in your opinion, more or less than 50% that one of those 3 is for the 185 strap?
I do think that there's a real case to be made for Islam to go up to 185 and fight Sean Strickland if Sean's able to maintain his belt. Now, that would be a fun fight. And a lot of people think that Islam Makhachev is a far superior grappler to Khamzat Chimaev. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think that he is a better champion. Obviously, he's the pound-for-pound #1 guy. And Khamzat just suffered his first loss. But I just think that size does matter at some point. We're starting to realize that Islam is a good size for 170, but maybe he's not the perfect frame for 170. And he even said, if I'm going to keep defending my belt here at 170, I'm going to need to get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. So if you're now talking about 15 pounds above that at 185, he's going to have his hands full trying to hold a guy like Sean Strickland down, who, whether he's better at grappling than Khamzat or not, whether his style is better for MMA or not, Khamzat had a very difficult time. Now, he got Sean down in the first round, but Sean's submission defense was really brilliant, and he wasted no energy down there. And then after that, it became largely a striking match that Sean Strickland was in control of. And if Sean Strickland can avoid the takedowns and avoid the submissions from Islam Makhachev, then Islam would have his hands full in a striking bout against Sean Strickland. So I don't really know how the poll sees it that way. Most people in the poll were saying Islam's far superior than Khamzat on the ground. I have to push back on that a little bit. They're saying that Sean Strickland has no chance against Islam. I have to push back a little bit. But before we get to 185, and I hope we get 4 fights left out of Islam, I hope that we get to see him close the 170 chapter, because it felt to me like Ian Garry, Carlos Prates, Michael Morales, and Shavkat Rakhmonov are sort of the last of this group.
That's the 4 horsemen you got to beat.
That's the 4 horsemen you got to beat in your new division. You're brand new to here. You've only had 2 fights at 170, 1 defense as the champion. So let's make some statements, but I don't think he needs to wait around for a Uros Medic. I don't think he needs to wait around for Amazov or anybody else that emerges as a hot contender. Gabriel Bonfim. These guys missed the mark just by, a few months. But I think that if he can clear out that division and beat those 3 guys I just named, then we would absolutely need to see him go to 185. And I think Islam Makhachev truly does deserve a shot at triple champ status. We saw Dana White say that if Alex Pereira would have beaten Cyril Gane at the White House, though it was for an interim title, that he would be considered the GOAT. Now, I disagreed with that. I still see John Jones as the GOAT right now. But if Islam Makhachev can become the first triple champion on a 21-fight win streak and beat the murderer's road that he's got in front of him, there's no question. What he did at 155 was very impressive, but we do have to take it with a grain of salt, because like the Arman Sarukian fight, which felt like it would have been a really fun rematch to see, got pulled from us, and 48 hours notice, Renato Moicano gets slid in there. So that wasn't really a true test for Islam. And Islam's all about legacy. Islam wanted to prove that he's the greatest fighter in the world, and he didn't think he could actually do that if he stayed at 155. Also, the weight cut sucked, so he went to 170, and just as he moved up there, 170 became the most stacked division in the UFC. So he's got the perfect opponents to deal with. Stylistically, everybody's a little different, right? Ian's good with the decisions. Prates has that one-shot killer instinct, KO power. Morales just seems to be like a freak of nature, super athlete, and really good where Islam seems to thrive. And then, of course, Shavkat also being an undefeated guy feels like we need to at least keep him in the conversation as long as he's able to get active within the next 6 months. But if he can beat those three guys, I say let him test it for 185, get that triple champ status, because Ilya is no longer in the running for ever becoming a triple champ, unless he goes on some sort of crazy run. Alex Pereira is never going to be a triple champ. I just don't see really anybody else that could make it happen. Khamzat Chimaev, no longer really in the running to ever become a triple champion. So Islam Makhachev is sort of the only guy left in the entire sport that could legitimately become a triple champion. And depending on who the belt holder is at 185, dictates whether he does it or not. If it's Nasruddin Imavov, he'll stay at 170 and retire there. If it's Khamzat Chimaev, I believe same thing. He'll stay at 170. But if Sean Strickland or DDP or,
Caio Borralho, like that,
Bo Nickel, any of these guys become a champion, then I would see a great case for Islam to move up, go ahead and see if he can become the world's first triple champion in the UFC. That would end all GOAT conversations for the time being. Islam would be the greatest fighter of all time. And it's really funny, right? Because if you ask Islam Makhachev right now who the greatest fighter of all time is, he says Khabib. But Islam has a significantly better UFC run and champion reign, now crossing into 2 weight divisions, which is far more impressive than what Khabib did. And I love Khabib. And, you'll never hear the words, I'm better than Khabib, come out of Islam's mouth. But as far as resume is concerned, stats are concerned, accolades, and now 2 belts, Islam Makhachev is the greatest fighter to ever come out of Dagestan. And I think, obviously, largely it comes from being Khabib's main training partner and Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov's favorite student. But I just have to say that Islam Makhachev is for sure inching towards becoming the GOAT and also ending the conversation. Right now, we've got John Jones, George St. Pierre, Islam, Khabib, and Mighty Mouse. And everybody has their opinion. Depending on what era you got into the UFC or what division you like the most, you might side with one of those guys more than the other. But if Islam's able to win 3 or 4 more fights, whether they're all at 170 or most at 170 and then 185, I certainly think that he would end the GOAT debate for the time being, and somebody would have to come up that we don't even know their name right now. They might not even be old enough to compete in the UFC before we see anybody dethrone him as the actual GOAT of the sport.
Yeah, and if you ask Khabib who the GOAT is, Khabib says John Jones. Now, a lot of people have Khabib as their GOAT, and they cite the PED stuff with John as why he's not the GOAT. Now, John competed in a different era where everybody was using performance enhancers, and so...
And I also have to remind you, Islam has now 6 title defenses, and John Jones had 16.
Exactly. So, but it was a different era. There was some people that were on their way out. The level of competition at light heavyweight. There's a lot of factors, right?
Sure.
I think Islam is working his way into top 3 greatest of all time. I do believe that he has a better resume, and I don't think that's really debatable, than Khabib at this point. However, there is no Islam Makhachev without Abdulmanap and Khabib. And so Islam, that's why Islam will never overstep and say, yeah, I'm actually at the best at this point. And Khabib will always give them credit and praise. And I love the relationship between those two. But I'm wondering your opinion, because I don't think Islam needs to win 3 more to be the greatest of all time. I think if he beat, let's say he beat Prates, and then let's say just, for sake of argument, that they do Shavkat and Ian, and Shavkat comes out, and then he fights Shavkat, and he wins those 2 fights, and he says, you know what? That's it. I'm calling it a day. I just turned 36 years old. That's enough for me.
Yeah.
Multiple defenses in each weight class. I would probably have him as number 1 at that point in time. So
me too.
I know a lot of people think that he needs to go on a several more fight run. I really think he needs 2 more. I think he needs to beat Prates and beat either Morales or Shavkat. If he does those 2 things, I don't think that there would be much of a debate for who the best of all time is, especially as the resumes would be comparable to John, and then you don't have the extracurriculars and the positive tests.
Yeah, and the thing with Carlos Prates and Islam is that fight could wind up being very competitive, and obviously it's a matchup that's compelling to the highest level. We want to see those types of fights take place. That's striker versus grappler in the modern era to the highest level. But if he goes out there and submits Carlos Prates, he's not going to get the credit. People are going to go, yeah, he took him where Carlos Prates has no chance to win. And we all know that there's a massive deficit in Carlos Prates' takedown defense and his ability to fight off the ground. And I think Islam would be seen as having a mismatch and an advantage over Carlos Prates. So I think he will have to beat Carlos. He'll probably have to beat Morales. And I think if we can get Shavkat back in there, that's the real fight that would tell us, okay, Islam, if he can beat Shavkat Rakhmonov, there's no doubt, because Shavkat has proven to us with the undefeated record, the insane finishing streak that he had, which was halted by Ian Garry, but still, Shavkat's record is absolutely insane. That would be the one that would push it over the edge for me. And I would say, without a doubt, we can't even bring up John Jones or George St. Pierre or Mighty Mouse anymore, or even Habib for that matter. Islam is the GOAT of the sport. I also want to bring up one other person real quick, and I hope I'm not going too far off the weeds. Usman Nurmagomedov was in attendance, front row, and the camera, which Celebrity Cam picks out all sorts of people, a lot of UFC fighters. They never pick up a PFL fighter, but I have a feeling that Jake Paul dropping the ball with Usman Nurmagomedov at that last MVP PFL event was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. Dana White hasn't really let us into anything. I think there's some sort of contract issues as to why he can't really speak too much about his negotiations with Usman, but Usman is the other guy that if there's anybody that can emerge and become the next pound for pound #1 fighter in the world or the potential GOAT of the sport, and even Habib has said, I think Usman has what it takes to be the greatest fighter of all time. Now you're talking about 3 of the top 5 guys all coming from the exact same stable, and 2 of them having the exact same name in Nurmagomedov. And then, by the way, their best friend and brother, not blood related, but their brother, Islam Makhachev, sits there at the top. So I really do hope that we got a little foreshadowing from the UFC that Usman Nurmagomedov will be coming to the UFC. He'll go right to the 155 division. I don't think we need to start him unranked. I think we need to start him right there in the top 10, give him a top 10 guy, give him a top 5 guy, and then put him in a title shot and let his epic run begin. Because I think that if that happens and we've got the 155 with another representative from Dagestan who's just an undefeated freak that knows how to win and is actually maybe the most technical as far as all realms of mixed martial arts are concerned to ever come out of Team Khabib, now we're talking about, without a question of a doubt, the most dominant camp that the sport has ever seen and may ever see, with Habib leading the way, Islam taking over. Umar's probably going to become a champion at some point. Now you insert Usman, who really belongs in the UFC but hasn't gotten over there just yet. I really hope we see him come over, and I think the UFC showing him on the Celebrity Cam last night was a good sign if you want to see Usman Nurmagomedov in the UFC.
Well, maybe we'll have some midweek news to break when we do our episode sometime either Tuesday or Wednesday,
Yeah.
But I think that's a perfect place to leave it, guys. Thank you for watching this recap episode, and thank you all to everybody that showed up last night to the live stream, both when we were reacting to the fights and then our immediate recap of what happened and what we saw thereafter. We are very appreciative of all the support that we had last night, the love in the chat. It was by far the biggest night of live stream in the Barnhill Brothers history, and it wasn't even close. And it's all thanks to you guys and our growing community. So until Monday, make sure you come back Monday at 8 p.m. Central Time. Nick's going to be doing Matchmaker Monday, and he's going to have a juicy match for each and every fighter that fought on the main card of UFC 330. That's a live stream that's very interactive with the chat. So if you want to come hang out, chat with Nick, give your input, it's a good one to come to. He will see you there. And until then, have a wonderful day.
Peace.